She counted the pennies in her palm 7 times. 7 cents. The bread cost 8. Virginia Carter had not eaten a proper meal in 4 days. She was alone in a strange town, her parents both dead, with nothing but worn boots and the last of her dignity holding her together. When the shopkeeper told her she was 1 penny short, she turned to leave with her head held high, refusing to let anyone see her break. But a stranger had been watching her through the dusty window, and in that moment, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Thomas Turner was a terrible liar. Everyone knew it. But he walked into that store and told the most ridiculous lie she had ever heard, just to put food in her hands without making her feel small. What he did not know was that this starving woman would one day build an empire beside him, raise 4 children with him, and love him for 30 years. Stay until the very end, because this story will show you that sometimes your lowest moment is exactly where your greatest love is waiting to find you. This story teaches us that accepting help with grace is just as important as offering it. It reminds us that dignity is not destroyed by hard times, and that the right person will see your worth even when you cannot afford a loaf of bread. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness, 1 penny's worth of compassion, can become the foundation of a lifetime of love. If this story touched your heart, drop a comment and tell me, has a stranger's kindness ever changed your life? I would love to hear your story. Hit that like button if you believe kindness always comes back around. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that reminds you how powerful a single moment of compassion can be. Share this with someone who needs to know that their worst day might be leading them to their best life. Sometimes one share plants a seed of hope in someone who desperately needs it. The general store smelled of sawdust and sugar when Virginia Carter walked through the door that afternoon. Her worn boots barely made a sound against the wooden planks of Randsburg, California. She carried herself with quiet dignity despite the threadbare calico dress that hung a bit too loose on her slender frame. Her dark hair was pinned back in a simple bun that had seen better days. The coins in her palm had been counted 3 times already before she even left the small cabin she rented at the edge of town. But she counted them again anyway, her fingers trembling slightly as she approached the counter where loaves of bread sat in a neat row. 7 cents. She had 7 cents. Virginia had not eaten a proper meal in 4 days. She had stretched her last supplies as far as they could go, but now there was nothing left. Not a scrap of bread, not a handful of beans, not even coffee to trick her stomach into feeling full. The smell of fresh bread made her dizzy. She gripped the counter edge to steady herself. Thomas Turner had been loading supplies onto his wagon outside when he first noticed her through the dusty window. Something about the careful way she moved, the precise counting of those copper pennies, made him pause mid-motion with a 50-pound sack of flour still balanced on his shoulder. He was a tall man, weathered by years of working cattle drives and managing his modest ranch in the hills above town. His hair was sun-bleached brown, and he had the kind of blue eyes that had witnessed both the cruelty and kindness the West had to offer. At 28, he had learned to read people quickly, and what he saw in this woman's face was not laziness or foolishness. It was the quiet desperation of someone trying to survive with dignity intact. Thomas set down the flour sack slowly, his eyes never leaving the woman inside the store. "That will be 8 cents, miss," said Mr. Henderson from behind the counter. His tone was neutral but not unkind. The old shopkeeper had seen plenty of hard times himself. Virginia counted the pennies again, her lips moving silently. 7, still 7. No matter how many times she counted, there would never be 8. Her heart sank, but she kept her chin up. "I apologize, Mr. Henderson. I seem to have miscounted at home. I only have 7 cents. Could I possibly pay you the remainder on Friday when I finish Mrs. Patterson's sewing order?" Thomas watched from outside as Henderson's face softened with pity. Something in his own chest tightened at the sight. He had seen that look before. He had been on the receiving end of it himself years ago, when his father's ranch went under after a harsh winter killed half their herd. Pity was sometimes necessary, but it always came with a cost to one's pride. "Now, miss, you know I cannot do that," Henderson began, not unkindly. "I have got bills to pay myself, and if I started extending credit to everyone who asked, well, I understand completely, Virginia interrupted, her voice steady despite the flush creeping up her neck. Thank you for your time. She turned to leave, and Thomas made his decision in the space of a heartbeat. He dusted off his hands and walked into the store with the kind of purposeful stride that came from years of making difficult choices and living with them. Henderson, add that loaf to my order, he said, his voice casual as he approached the counter. And I will need a few more items as well. Virginia had frozen near the door, her back still turned. Sir, I cannot accept charity, she said quietly without looking at him. Thomas did not look at her directly either. Instead, he began listing items to Henderson, his tone suggesting this was purely business. 2 more loaves of bread, a sack of cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, dried apples, and whatever vegetables you have that are still fresh. Mr. Turner, that is quite a lot, Henderson said, his eyebrows raising slightly. Thomas shrugged like it was nothing special. My housekeeper quit last week, ran off to San Francisco with a traveling salesman, left my cupboards in complete disarray. I cannot tell what I have and what I need anymore, so I figure it is better to have too much than too little. It was not entirely convincing, and all 3 of them knew it. But Thomas's tone suggested he would not appreciate being questioned. Henderson began gathering the items while Virginia finally turned around. Her gray eyes met Thomas's for the first time. You do not have to do this, she said quietly. I am not doing anything except buying groceries, he replied, finally looking at her directly. Though I do have a wagon outside and these supplies are heavy. If you happen to be walking in the direction of the edge of town, I would not object to the company. She studied him for a long moment. Thomas wondered what she saw. He was not the handsomest man in Randsburg. His nose had been broken twice, and his hands were scarred from years of ranch work. But he kept himself clean, treated people fairly, and had built his small ranch from nothing after his father's death 5 years prior. It was not much, but it was honest. I live in the cabin past the old Miller place, she said finally. I know it, Thomas replied. I passed by there on my way home. The transaction was completed in silence, Henderson's knowing look ignored by both parties. Thomas loaded the supplies into his wagon while Virginia stood awkwardly nearby, clearly torn between gratitude and the discomfort of accepting help. The afternoon sun beat down on Randsburg's main street, turning the desert dust golden and making the distant hills shimmer with heat. I should explain, Virginia said once they were moving, the wagon creaking beneath them as Thomas's horses plodded forward. I am not usually in such circumstances. You do not owe me an explanation, Thomas said, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. Perhaps not, but I feel the need to give one anyway. She folded her hands in her lap. I do not wish you to think I make a habit of accepting assistance from strangers. I do not think that at all. He glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the horses. I think you are someone who has had some bad luck and is trying her best to manage with dignity. There is no shame in that. They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds were the wagon wheels creaking and the occasional snort from one of the horses. Randsburg was a small mining town built on hopes of silver and copper that had not quite panned out as expected. Most residents were either miners hoping for a strike, merchants serving those miners, or ranchers like Thomas who worked the surrounding lands. It was a hard life, but an honest one. Why did you help me? Virginia asked suddenly. You do not know me. Thomas considered the question carefully before answering. When I was 23, my father died and left me with a failing ranch, more debt than assets, and a younger sister to support. A neighbor, old Mr. Cooper, brought by supplies one day, said he had overordered and would I please take the extras so they did not go to waste in his barn. He paused to guide the horses around a rough patch in the road. It was a lie, of course. He had spent his own money to help us. I tried to refuse, and he said something I have never forgotten. He said that accepting help with grace is sometimes harder than offering it, but both are necessary for a community to survive. He said someday I would be in a position to help someone else, and when that day came, I should remember how it felt to need assistance. That is beautiful, Virginia said softly. What happened to your sister? Married a banker in Sacramento 2 years ago. Has a baby daughter now. Thomas smiled slightly at the memory. Wrote me last month saying she is the happiest she has ever been. Mr. Cooper came to the wedding, said he was proud of us both. And the ranch? Turned around slowly. I have about 300 head of cattle now, enough grazing land to support them. And I make enough to live comfortably, if not lavishly. He glanced at her again. It took 3 years of backbreaking work and more than a few nights wondering if I had made the right choices. But we survived. Virginia's cabin came into view. It was a small structure that had clearly seen better days. The roof sagged slightly on one side, and the wood needed fresh paint, but she had made efforts to improve it. A small garden plot showed recent tending, though the desert climate made growing anything a challenge. Wildflowers in a tin can sat on the windowsill. I will help you bring everything inside, Thomas said, climbing down from the wagon before she could protest. The interior of the cabin was sparse but clean. A single room served as kitchen, bedroom, and living space, with a small iron stove in one corner and a narrow bed in another. A sewing basket overflowing with fabric scraps sat near the window, evidence of her work. Thomas tried not to notice the nearly empty cupboard as he began unloading supplies, but Virginia caught his expression. It looks worse than it is, she said. They both knew that was not true. They worked in silence, filling the cupboard with the food he had purchased. When everything was stored away, Thomas turned to find Virginia standing in the center of the room, tears streaming silently down her face. She wiped at them quickly, embarrassed. I apologize, she said. I have been trying so hard to manage, and I suppose the relief of having food again is overwhelming. Thomas felt something crack open in his chest at the sight of her tears. When did you last eat a proper meal? She did not answer, which was answer enough. Thomas stood in that small cabin watching Virginia try to compose herself, and made another decision. This woman was not going to spend another night hungry if he had anything to say about it. I have a standing arrangement with the boarding house in town, he said carefully, choosing his words with precision. I pay for my meals in advance every month, but this month I accidentally paid double. I spoke with Mrs. Williams about it, and she said she cannot refund the money. But I could bring a guest any time I wanted until the credit is used up. Would you do me the favor of joining me for dinner this evening? That way the money does not go to waste. It was another transparent fiction, and Virginia looked at him with eyes that saw right through it. But she also saw something else, something in his face that was not pity, but genuine concern, and perhaps something more tentative that neither of them was ready to name yet. You are a terrible liar, Mr. Turner, she said. But there was the ghost of a smile on her lips. Thomas, he corrected, and yes, I am, but I'm also hungry, and I dislike eating alone, and Mrs. Williams makes the best pot roast in 3 counties. So what do you say? Virginia, she replied, and yes, I will join you, though I must insist this is the last time I accept such kindness without being able to repay it. Fair enough, Thomas agreed, though he was already planning how to ensure it would not be the last time at all. Mrs. Williams' boarding house was the largest building in Randsburg aside from the mine offices. It was a 2-story structure painted white with green shutters, serving meals to boarders and townspeople alike. The dining room was half full when Thomas and Virginia arrived, and Thomas did not miss the curious glances from other diners. In a town this small, gossip spread faster than wildfire. Mr. Turner, so good to see you, Mrs. Williams said warmly. She was a stout woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes took in Virginia with obvious interest. And you have brought a guest. This is Miss Virginia Carter, Thomas said. Virginia, Mrs. Williams runs the finest establishment in town. Flattery will not get you extra helpings, Mrs. Williams said, but she was smiling. Though for your lovely companion, I might make an exception. Please, sit yourselves down. The meal was indeed as good as Thomas had promised. Pot roast with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread slathered with butter, and apple pie for dessert. Virginia ate slowly at first, clearly trying to maintain propriety, but Thomas noticed her plate was cleaned thoroughly. Color returned to her cheeks as the meal progressed. and he realized just how beautiful she was when not weighed down by hunger and worry. Her gray eyes were intelligent and kind, her hands graceful despite the calluses from sewing work. When she laughed at something he said about one of his more stubborn cattle, the sound made his heart skip. "How did you learn to sew?" he asked over coffee. "My mother taught me," Virginia said, her expression softening at the memory. "She was a seamstress in Boston before she married my father." After she passed when I was 12, sewing became my way of staying connected to her memory. I made all my own clothes, then started taking in work for neighbors. I had hoped to open a proper dress shop someday, but circumstances have not quite aligned for that dream. Thomas leaned forward slightly. "Why did your father come west?" Virginia's expression grew complicated, and Thomas could see she was deciding how much to share. Finally, she took a breath and began. He was always chasing something better. A new opportunity, a fresh start, a fortune just around the corner. "We moved 7 times in the 10 years after my mother died. He was not a bad man, Thomas, just a restless one who could never quite settle. When he wrote me about California, about the inheritance from a distant cousin, I think part of him truly believed it. He wanted to believe it so badly." "But there was nothing," Thomas said gently. "There was a grave," Virginia corrected. The cousin had died 3 years earlier, and whatever small estate he had was long since settled and distributed to other relatives. By the time I arrived, my father had also passed. 2 weeks before I got here, I found myself in a strange town with exactly $23 to my name and no family left in the world." Thomas felt his chest tighten at her words. To lose both parents, and arrive in a new place with nothing and no one. He could not imagine the strength it had taken her to keep going. "How did you manage?" "I rented the cabin because it was the cheapest option," she said. "And I started offering my services as a seamstress. I have been doing mending and simple alterations for the ladies in town, but work has been slow. It takes time to build a reputation in a new place, and unfortunately food does not wait for reputations to be established." She met his eyes directly, her chin lifted with that dignity he had noticed from the first moment. "I am not telling you this to garner sympathy," she continued. "I simply want you to understand that I am doing everything I can to manage on my own. Your kindness today was more than I can properly express. But I cannot allow myself to become dependent on anyone's charity." "What if it were not charity?" Thomas asked. The words came out before he had fully thought them through. But once spoken, they felt exactly right. "What do you mean?" Thomas set down his coffee cup, organizing his thoughts. "I was not entirely lying about needing help at the ranch. My housekeeper did quit, though it was 2 months ago, not last week. I have been managing on my own, but the truth is the house is a disaster. I spend more time trying to figure out meals than I do working with the cattle. I genuinely need someone to help with cooking and cleaning and mending. I could pay a fair wage for honest work." Virginia studied him carefully, and Thomas could see her turning the idea over in her mind, examining it from every angle, looking for the trap or the hidden cost. "Thomas, I appreciate the offer," she said slowly, "but we both know you are inventing this position because you feel sorry for me." "I am inventing nothing," he replied firmly. "I am recognizing that you have skills I need and I have resources you need. It seems foolish for both of us to struggle independently when we could help each other." He leaned forward. "Virginia, I am offering you employment, not charity. You would earn every penny. My ranch house has not been properly cleaned in 2 months. My clothes need mending so badly I'm running out of shirts without holes. I have been eating beans and hardtack for weeks because I cannot cook worth a damn." She was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words. Finally, she asked, "What are the terms?" Thomas felt relief flood through him, though he was careful not to show it. "Come out 6 days a week," he said, working it out as he spoke. "I will collect you in the morning, bring you to the ranch, and take you home before dark. You handle the house, the cooking, the mending, whatever needs doing. I will pay you $3 a week plus meals while you are working." "That is too much," Virginia said immediately. "It is exactly what I paid my previous housekeeper," Thomas replied, "and she did half the work you would do because she was 70 years old and her hands were crippled with arthritis." He held up a hand before she could protest further. "Try it for 2 weeks. If at the end of that time you feel it is not a fair arrangement, we will renegotiate. But give it a chance." Virginia bit her lip, clearly torn between pride and practicality. Thomas watched the battle play out on her face and found himself hoping desperately that practicality would win. Finally, it did. 2 weeks, she agreed. "But I keep my sewing work for the other ladies in town as well. I will not abandon commitments I have already made." "I would not ask you to," Thomas assured her. "You can bring your sewing to the ranch if you like. Work on it during slow times." They shook hands across the table, and Thomas felt the warmth of her palm against his, the slight tremor that suggested she was nervous but determined. Something shifted in that moment, something neither of them acknowledged, but both felt. This was more than just an employment arrangement, though neither was ready to examine what else it might be. As Thomas drove Virginia back to her cabin that evening, the stars beginning to appear in the vast California sky, he could not help but feel that his life had just changed in some fundamental way. He did not know how or why. He only knew that when he looked at this woman beside him, something in his chest felt fuller than it had in years. "Sleep well, Virginia," he said when they reached her door. "I will be here at dawn." "Good night, Thomas, and thank you for everything." She disappeared inside, and Thomas sat in his wagon for a long moment staring at the closed door. Then he clicked his tongue at the horses and headed home, already looking forward to morning in a way he had not looked forward to anything in a very long time. The next morning, Thomas arrived at Virginia's cabin just as the sun was painting the eastern hills gold and pink. She was already waiting outside, wearing her cleanest dress with her hair pinned back neatly. She looked rested, and Thomas wondered if a full stomach had helped her sleep better than she had in weeks. "Good morning," he said as she climbed up beside him on the wagon seat. "Ready to see what you have gotten yourself into?" "As ready as I will ever be," Virginia replied, "though I suspect you may have understated the challenge." Thomas laughed. "You might be right about that." As they traveled up into the hills above town, the landscape changed from dusty mining town to rolling grasslands dotted with oak trees. Thomas's ranch was situated in a small valley with a creek running through it, the precious water that made the difference between thriving and barely surviving in this arid land. Virginia's eyes widened as the ranch came into view. The house was a solid structure of wood and stone, larger than she had expected, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides and windows that faced the morning sun. Beyond it stood a well-maintained barn, and she could see cattle dotting the hillsides in the distance. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. "My father built the original house," Thomas explained as they approached. "I added on 3 years ago when I finally had the money." He smiled somewhat sheepishly. "Probably built it bigger than necessary for just me, but I suppose I was optimistic about the future." They climbed down from the wagon, and Thomas led her up the porch steps and through the front door. The interior confirmed his claims about needing help. Dishes were piled in the sink, some with remnants of meals long past. Dust covered most surfaces like a gray blanket. His clothes were draped over chairs and doorknobs, apparently his system for knowing what was clean and what was not. And his idea of organizing seemed to involve putting things wherever there was space. But the bones of the house were good. Solid wooden furniture, large windows that let in plenty of light, a stone fireplace that would be welcome in winter. Virginia could see the potential beneath the chaos. "Lord have mercy," she muttered before catching herself. "I apologize. I mean, this will take some work." "I warned you," Thomas said, looking genuinely embarrassed. "I am much better with cattle than housekeeping. Where should I start? Wherever you think best." Thomas was already backing toward the door, clearly eager to escape to more familiar territory. "I will be working with the herd today, checking on some new calves and repairing fence line. Come find me if you need anything." He left her to it, and Virginia rolled up her sleeves with a determined sigh. She started with the kitchen, heating water on the stove and tackling the tower of dishes first. Then she moved through the house room by room, dusting and scrubbing and putting things in their proper places. It was strangely satisfying work, bringing order to chaos. She found herself humming as she cleaned, songs her mother had taught her years ago. The house had good bones and better potential. She could see ways to arrange things more efficiently, places where small touches would make it feel more like a home and less like a place where a man simply slept between workdays. At noon, Thomas returned to find the kitchen transformed. The counters gleamed, the floor was swept, and something that smelled incredible was simmering on the stove. "You made lunch?" he asked, genuine surprise in his voice. Virginia looked up from the pot she was stirring. "You hired me to cook, did you not? I hope you do not mind that I explored a bit to find ingredients. Your root cellar had vegetables that were still good, and I found preserved meat and herbs." "Mind?" Thomas moved closer to the stove, inhaling deeply. "Virginia, this smells amazing." She ladled stew into bowls and set them on the table, which she had cleaned and set with proper utensils she had found buried in a drawer. Thomas sat down and took a bite. His eyes widened, and then he closed them with an expression of pure contentment. "This is the best thing I have eaten in months," he said when he could speak again. "Maybe years. You are incredible." Virginia felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. "It is just stew. It is not just anything. It is actual food, cooked by someone who knows what they are doing." He took another bite, then another. "I have been living on burnt beans and bread so hard you could hammer nails with it. This is a miracle." She laughed, and it was a real laugh, free and unguarded. Thomas looked up at the sound, and something shifted in his expression, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. They ate together, talking easily about the ranch and the town, and nothing of particular importance. But the conversation felt comfortable, natural, like they had known each other far longer than a single day. After lunch, Thomas returned to his work, and Virginia continued hers. By late afternoon, the main rooms of the house were cleaner than they had been in months. She had found his sewing basket, empty and dusty from disuse, and gathered the clothes that needed mending into a pile she could work through over the coming days. When Thomas came to take her home, he stood in the doorway of his own house and stared. "I cannot believe this is the same place," he said quietly. "It feels like a home now, not just a building where I sleep." Virginia gathered her shawl. "It is a good house, Thomas. It just needed some attention." So did I, he thought, but did not say. The ride back to Virginia's cabin was quiet but comfortable. The sunset painted the sky in oranges and purples, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. "Same time tomorrow?" Thomas asked as they reached her door. "Same time," Virginia agreed. She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Thomas, for giving me this chance. Thank you for taking it." He watched her go inside, then drove home with a smile on his face that stayed there all evening. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into a month. Thomas and Virginia fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Each morning, Thomas would collect Virginia at dawn, and they would ride together to the ranch as the sun rose over the hills. She would work in the house while he tended his cattle, and they would share meals together, their conversations growing longer and more personal as the days passed. Virginia seemed to bloom under regular meals and meaningful work. The hollowness left her cheeks, and the worry faded from her eyes. She laughed more often now, and Thomas found himself doing ridiculous things just to hear that sound. He told her stories about his cattle, giving them names and personalities that made her shake her head but smile. He brought wildflowers back from the range and left them on the kitchen table without comment. He found excuses to come back to the house during the day, claiming he needed water or a tool or something from his room. They both knew he just wanted to see her. The ranch house had been transformed under Virginia's care. Every surface gleamed. Curtains she had sewn from fabric in the attic hung in the windows. The cupboards were organized. The meals were delicious. And for the first time in years, Thomas's house felt like a home. But it was not just the house that had changed. Thomas had changed too. He found himself wearing his better shirts, making sure his hair was combed before he picked her up in the morning. He shaved every day instead of every few days. He caught himself whistling while he worked, something he had not done since before his father died. Virginia noticed. Of course she noticed. But neither of them spoke about what was happening between them. One afternoon in October, Thomas came back to the house to find Virginia in the yard, scattering vegetable scraps for a family of wild rabbits that had taken up residence near the barn. "You are spoiling them," he said, leaning against the fence post to watch. "They are hungry," Virginia replied simply, not looking up. "I know what that feels like." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He moved to stand beside her, watching the rabbits nibble at the scraps. "You never have to feel that way again," he said quietly. "Not as long as I have anything to say about it." Virginia finally looked at him, her gray eyes searching his face. What she saw there made her breath catch. "Thomas," she began, but he shook his head. "I know, it is complicated. You work for me, and I do not want you to feel obligated to—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. "I just want you to know that you are safe here, whatever else happens or does not happen." Virginia was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I know," she said softly, "and that means more than you can possibly understand." They stood there together, watching the rabbits, their hands linked between them. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Some things were better expressed in silence, but the moment could not last forever. There was work to be done, cattle to tend, a house to maintain. They released each other's hands without comment and returned to their separate tasks. But something had shifted between them, some barrier had fallen. That evening at dinner, their conversation was different, more personal. Virginia told him about her mother, about the songs she used to sing, about learning to sew at her knee. Thomas told her about his sister, about the hard years after their father died, about the pride he felt when she married well and found happiness. "We have both lost so much," Virginia said quietly when the meal was done and they sat together in the fading light. "And found things, too," Thomas replied. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I know we have only known each other a month, but I feel like I have been waiting for you my whole life." Virginia turned her hand over beneath his, palm to palm. "I feel it too," she admitted. "But I am afraid. What if it is just gratitude? What if I only feel this way because you saved me from starvation?" Thomas shook his head. "You are the bravest person I know. You were surviving on your own before I came along. Barely, maybe, but surviving. You would have found a way with or without me. What you feel, whatever it is not just gratitude. How can you be sure? Because gratitude does not make my heart race every time you smile. Gratitude does not keep me awake at night thinking about you. Gratitude does not make me want to build a future with someone." Virginia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She opened her mouth to respond, but Thomas shook his head again. "You do not have to say anything right now. I just needed you to know. We can take as much time as you need to figure out what you feel. Nothing has to change." But everything had already changed. They both knew it. Thomas drove Virginia home that night in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Fuller, somehow. Charged with possibility. At her door, Virginia turned to look at him. "Thomas Turner," she said, "you are the kindest man I have ever known." "That is not exactly a declaration of love," he replied with a small smile. "No," she agreed, "but it is a start." She disappeared inside, and Thomas sat in his wagon for a long time, staring at the stars and wondering what the future might hold. It was Mrs. Williams who finally forced Thomas to examine what was happening. He had come into town for supplies one October afternoon, his mind half on the list in his pocket, and half on Virginia, as it always seemed to be these days. He was loading flour into his wagon when Mrs. Williams appeared beside him with the determined look of a woman who had something to say. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I need a word with you." Thomas set down the flour sack. "Ma'am?" She glanced around to make sure they were not overheard, then fixed him with her sharp eyes. That girl is falling in love with you. Thomas nearly dropped the sack he had just set down. I beg your pardon? Virginia Carter. The one you have been bringing to dinner every Sunday. The one everyone in town knows is working at your ranch. She is falling for you, and from what I can see, you are falling just as hard. Thomas felt his face flush. Mrs. Williams, I do not think that is... Do not waste my time with denials, she interrupted. I have run this boarding house for 20 years. I have seen more romances begin and end than you have seen sunsets. I know what love looks like when it is blooming, and you two have got it bad. She poked him in the chest with one finger. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it again. What was he going to do about it? I see the problem, Mrs. Williams continued, her voice softening slightly. She works for you. You think she might feel obligated. You do not want to take advantage of someone in your employ. That is exactly it, Thomas admitted. Well, that is a credit to your character. But here is the thing, Mr. Turner. Life is short, especially out here. People die of fever and snake bites and mining accidents. They get thrown from horses and caught in stampedes. They set off for San Francisco and disappear into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Mrs. Williams shook her head. Do not waste time pretending you do not care for her just because the situation is complicated. Complicated is not impossible. Complicated just means you have to be more careful. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, letting her words sink in. What would you suggest I do? Be honest with her. Tell her how you feel. Make it clear that her job is not dependent on her answer, that she can say no and nothing will change. Give her the choice. She is a smart woman. She can decide for herself what she wants. Thomas nodded slowly. You are right. Of course I am right. Mrs. Williams smiled. Now go on home and think about what you're going to say. And for heaven's sake, do it soon before the whole town dies of suspense. Thomas drove back to the ranch in a daze, Mrs. Williams' words echoing in his mind. Was it true? Was Virginia falling in love with him? He thought about the way she looked at him sometimes when she thought he was not watching. The way her hand lingered when she passed him a cup of coffee. The way she had held his hand by the rabbit warren and admitted she felt something too. It was true. It had to be true. And what about his own feelings? Thomas had been telling himself it was just attraction, just appreciation for her kindness and her beauty and her quiet strength. But it was more than that. So much more. He loved her. The realization should have terrified him, but instead it felt like something settling into place. A piece of his life he had not known was missing until it appeared. Virginia was kneading bread when he returned to the ranch, her hands working the dough with practiced efficiency. Flour dusted her cheeks, and a strand of dark hair had escaped her bun to curl against her neck. She looked up when he entered, smiling. You are back early. Is everything all right? Thomas took a deep breath. Virginia, we need to talk. Her hands stilled on the dough, and he saw worry flash across her face. That sounds ominous, she said, trying for lightness but not quite achieving it. Not about anything bad, Thomas said quickly. At least I hope it is not bad. He crossed the kitchen to stand before her, close enough to see the flecks of darker gray in her eyes, close enough to smell the bread dough and the lavender soap she used. I have not been entirely honest with you, he began. About why I offered you this job. Virginia's expression grew guarded. I see. No, you do not. Not yet. Let me explain. Thomas took another breath, gathering his courage. Yes, I genuinely needed help around the house. And yes, you have done excellent work, better than I could have hoped for. But Mrs. Williams said something to me today that made me realize I have been lying to myself as much as to you. What did she say? She said I was falling in love with you. Thomas let the words hang in the air between them. And she was right. I am. I have been since that first day in the general store. Maybe even since I saw you through the window, counting those pennies. Virginia stared at him, her gray eyes wide. And I know this is complicated, Thomas continued, the words tumbling out now like water through a broken dam. You work for me, and you might feel obligated. But I need you to know your job is not conditional. You can tell me you do not feel the same way. And tomorrow morning I will still come collect you. And nothing will change except I will stop pretending my heart does not race every time you smile. For a long moment, Virginia said nothing. Thomas felt his heart sinking. He had misread everything. He had ruined everything. Then tears began to slide down her cheeks, leaving tracks in the flower dust. "Oh no," Thomas said miserably. "I have upset you. I am so sorry. Please forget I said anything. I never meant to." "You are such an idiot," Virginia said. But she was laughing through her tears. Thomas stared at Virginia, utterly confused. She was crying and laughing at the same time, calling him an idiot, and he had no idea what any of it meant. "Thomas Turner," she said, stepping closer to him, "I have been in love with you since you invented that ridiculous lie about your housekeeper running off with a salesman. You are the worst liar I have ever met, and the kindest man I have ever known. And I have spent the last month trying not to feel this way because I was so afraid it would ruin everything." "You love me?" Thomas asked, hardly daring to believe it. "I love you," she confirmed. "I love your terrible housekeeping and your thoughtfulness. I love the way you talk to your cattle like they are old friends. I love that you help me without making me feel small. I love that you see me as more than my circumstances." She reached up and touched his face, her flour-dusted fingers gentle against his cheek. "I love you, Thomas. I have been so afraid to admit it, even to myself. But I do." Thomas felt like his heart might burst. He pulled her into his arms, not caring about the flour that transferred to his shirt. She melted against him, her arms wrapping around his waist, and when he kissed her, she kissed him back with all the emotion of the past month. It was clumsy and perfect. It tasted of salt from her tears and hope for the future. "Marry me," Thomas said when they finally broke apart. Virginia laughed breathlessly. "That is very sudden." "We have known each other 6 weeks," he agreed. "If anything, I am moving too slowly." He cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with all the love he felt. "Virginia, I do not want you to be my housekeeper. I want you to be my wife. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life together, a real partnership where we face whatever comes as equals. I want everything with you." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Thomas kissed her again, longer this time, slower. When they finally separated, both of them were breathing hard. "People will talk," Virginia said, though she did not sound like she cared. "Let them talk. I do not care what anyone thinks as long as I have you." They stood in the kitchen together, holding each other, marveling at how quickly everything had changed. A month ago, Virginia had been counting pennies for bread. Now she was engaged to a man who loved her, who saw her, who wanted to build a future with her. It felt like a miracle, but it was not magic. It was the natural result of two people choosing each other day after day, moment after moment. "We should celebrate," Thomas said. "I want to tell everyone. I want the whole town to know." Virginia smiled up at him. "Then let us go tell Mrs. Williams first. Something tells me she will not be entirely surprised." They drove into town together, sitting closer on the wagon seat than they ever had before. Their hands found each other somewhere along the way and did not let go. Mrs. Williams took one look at their faces and broke into a wide smile. "Well, it is about time," she said. "I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever." "You knew?" Thomas asked. "Everyone knew, dear." Mrs. Williams patted his cheek affectionately. "But the best stories unfold at their own pace. Now come in and let me feed you both. We have a wedding to plan." Over dinner, they talked about the future. They would marry as soon as it could be arranged at the church in town. Virginia would move into the ranch house as Thomas's wife, not his housekeeper. She would continue her sewing work, building the business she had always dreamed of. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would build something lasting. That night, as Thomas drove Virginia back to her cabin one last time, the stars seemed brighter than they had ever been. 3 weeks, Virginia said. Mrs. Williams said she could arrange everything in 3 weeks. 3 weeks is too long, Thomas replied. But I suppose I can wait if I must. Virginia laughed and leaned her head against his shoulder. You waited 28 years to find me, she pointed out. 3 more weeks will not kill you. No, Thomas agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. But I will be counting every minute. When they reached her cabin, Thomas walked her to the door and kissed her good night. A proper kiss, long and lingering, the kind that made promises about the future. I love you, Virginia Carter, he said, and I love you, Thomas Turner. Now go home before I forget I'm supposed to be a proper lady. Thomas laughed and returned to his wagon, looking back at her silhouette in the doorway. 3 weeks, he called. 3 weeks, she called back. He drove home with a heart so full it felt like it might overflow. The wedding took place on a golden October afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after Thomas's proposal. The church in Randsburg was small, but it was filled to capacity. It seemed like the entire town had turned out to witness the marriage of the rancher who had been too busy with cattle to court anyone, and the seamstress who had arrived in town with nothing but 7 cents and her dignity. Virginia wore a dress she had sewn herself, from fabric Thomas had insisted on purchasing. It was a beautiful blue that matched the California sky, simple but elegant, exactly right for the woman she was. Her dark hair was pinned up with tiny wildflowers Thomas had picked that morning. She had never felt more beautiful in her life. Thomas waited at the altar in his best suit, his hair combed, his boots polished, his heart pounding. When Virginia appeared at the back of the church on the arm of Mr. Henderson, who had offered to walk her down the aisle, Thomas felt tears sting his eyes. She was everything. She was his future. She was home. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love and honor each other, to face challenges together, to build something lasting. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Virginia so thoroughly that the congregation burst into applause and laughter. Mrs. Williams hosted the reception at the boarding house, and the celebration lasted well into the evening. There was music and dancing, food and drink, toasts and well wishes. Even Mr. Henderson had brought a gift. A set of fine china with a note that read, "For counting blessings instead of pennies." Virginia cried when she read it. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift away, Thomas took Virginia's hand and led her outside. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage from the hills. "How do you feel, Mrs. Turner?" he asked. "Like the luckiest woman in the world," she replied, "and also like my feet are going to fall off from all that dancing." Thomas laughed and scooped her up in his arms. "Then let me carry you. Thomas, put me down. People will see. Let them see." He kissed her nose. "I want everyone to know how much I love my wife." They drove to the ranch together, to the home that was now truly theirs. Thomas carried Virginia across the threshold and set her down gently in the living room she had transformed over the past weeks. "Welcome home," he said softly. Virginia looked around at the space that had become so familiar, seeing it now with new eyes. She was not a housekeeper anymore. She was not a guest. This was her home, her life, her future. She turned to Thomas and wrapped her arms around him. "Take me to bed, husband," she whispered. Thomas needed no further invitation. The first year of marriage was not without challenges. Virginia continued her sewing work, and her reputation grew until she had clients from neighboring towns requesting her services. Thomas worked hard to expand his herd, and together they weathered a difficult winter that killed some of their cattle and a dry spring that tested their water supply. But they weathered it together. Every decision was made jointly. Every problem was faced as a team. When things were hard, they held each other through the night and reminded themselves that they had survived worse alone. Virginia proved to have a sharp mind for business. She kept careful records of their expenses and income, spotting patterns Thomas had never noticed. She suggested improvements to their grazing rotation that increased the health of their cattle. She noticed that other ranchers were struggling to find good breeding stock and suggested Thomas might diversify into selling breeding bulls. "You are brilliant," Thomas said one evening after she showed him her calculations on potential profits. "I am practical," Virginia corrected, "and I never want to count pennies for bread again. I never want anyone else to have to either." That combination of practicality and compassion became a hallmark of their marriage. When neighbors struggled, the Turners were there to help. When the widow Ferguson faced losing her farm after her husband's death, Virginia organized the town women to help with her harvest, while Thomas and the other ranchers pitched in with heavy labor. "We are passing it on," Thomas said one evening as they drove home from helping rebuild a neighbor's barn that had burned. "What Mr. Cooper did for me, what I did for you, now we do it for others." "It is what keeps a community alive," Virginia agreed, leaning against his shoulder. She laced her fingers through his. "We have been so blessed, Thomas. It is only right that we share those blessings." Their first child arrived in the autumn of 1885. A squalling red-faced boy they named James after Thomas's father. Virginia proved as capable a mother as she was a wife and businesswoman, though she laughed that motherhood was far more exhausting than any of her other roles combined. "He has your determination," Thomas said one sleepless night as Virginia nursed the baby. "And your appetite," Virginia replied. But she was smiling down at their son with such love that Thomas's heart ached with happiness. As James grew from baby to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Thomas's gamble on breeding stock paid off handsomely, and Virginia's sewing business had evolved into something far larger than she had ever imagined. "I am thinking of opening an actual shop in town," she mentioned one evening as they sat on the porch, watching James toddle after a butterfly. "Mrs. Peterson has offered to rent me the space above her millinery." Thomas considered this. "That would mean more time away from the ranch. Would you be unhappy with that?" Virginia was quiet for a moment, thinking through her answer. "I would miss being here every day," she admitted. "But I think I could manage both if I organized properly, and it would mean more income, more security." "We have plenty of security," Thomas said gently. "You do not have to prove anything." "I know." Virginia leaned against his shoulder. "But I want to build something of my own, too. Not because I do not value what we have built together, but because I remember what it felt like to have nothing. I never want to be that vulnerable again." Thomas understood completely. The memory of her counting pennies in that general store would probably stay with both of them forever. "Then open the shop," he said. "I support you completely." The dress shop opened the following spring and became an immediate success. Virginia had an eye for style and a talent for understanding what her clients wanted, even when they could not articulate it themselves. Within a year, she employed 4 seamstresses and was considering expanding into a larger space. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, arrived in 1887. Unlike her boisterous brother, Rose was a quiet, contemplative baby who seemed to observe the world with serious eyes. "She looks like you," Thomas told Virginia. "Same thoughtful expression, same gray eyes." "Heaven help her," Virginia laughed. "I hope she has better luck with her pennies than I did." But they both knew Rose would never have to count pennies. They had made sure of that. The years continued to unfold like a bolt of fine cloth, each one revealing new patterns and possibilities. Virginia juggled motherhood and business with the same practical determination she brought to everything. Thomas managed the ranch and did his full share of parenting, changing diapers and soothing nightmares with the same steady hands that gentled horses and delivered calves. In 1890, they welcomed twin boys into the family. The twins were as different as night and day despite sharing a birthday. William was bold and adventurous, always climbing things and getting into trouble. Robert was careful and studious, preferring books to roughhousing. "I do not know how we are going to manage 4 children," Virginia said, exhausted, as she fed the twins while Thomas wrangled the older 2. "The same way we have managed everything else," Thomas replied. "Together." And they did. As the children grew, the Turners became pillars of the Randsburg community. They were known for their generosity, their fairness, their willingness to help anyone in need. Thomas served on the town council. Virginia organized charity drives and taught young women to sew. But no matter how busy they became, they always made time for each other. Sunday afternoons were sacred, reserved for the family to be together. They had dinner at Mrs. Williams's boarding house every week without fail. And every night, no matter how tired they were, they talked about their days before falling asleep in each other's arms. "We have built something beautiful," Virginia said one night, looking out the window at the ranch they had created together. The cattle on the hills, the house full of sleeping children, the life they had woven from nothing but love and hard work. "We are still building it," Thomas replied. Every day. Mr. Cooper died in the spring of 1893. Thomas and Virginia stood at his funeral with tears streaming down their faces. They had visited him regularly over the years, bringing their children to meet the man whose kindness had set Thomas on a path that eventually led to Virginia. He had been at their wedding, had held each of their babies, had become like a grandfather to the Turner children. At the reception after the service, Mr. Cooper's son approached them. "My father wanted you to have something," he said, handing Thomas a small wooden box. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Thomas opened it carefully and found a receipt from 10 years earlier, a bill of sale for the supplies Mr. Cooper had brought to Thomas's failing ranch all those years ago. At the bottom, in Mr. Cooper's careful handwriting, were the words, "Paid in full through kindness passed forward." "He kept this?" Thomas asked, his voice thick with emotion. "He said it reminded him why we are here," Mr. Cooper's son replied. "Not just to survive, but to help each other thrive. He said you understood that lesson better than anyone he knew." That night, Thomas and Virginia sat on their porch and watched the sun set over the hills. Their children were inside doing homework and chores. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and well-maintained. Life was good. "Do you ever think about that day in the general store?" Thomas asked. "Every day," Virginia admitted. "Not with sadness anymore, but with gratitude. I was at my lowest point, and you saw me. Not as a charity case or someone to pity, but as a person worth knowing, worth loving." "You were always worth loving," Thomas said firmly. "I just had the good fortune to recognize it. We were both fortunate." Virginia laced her fingers through his. "I could have been too proud to accept your help. You could have been the kind of man who wanted something in return. Instead, we found each other at exactly the right moment." "Do you think Mr. Cooper was right about kindness being repaid through passing it forward?" "I think we have spent the last 10 years proving he was right. Every person we have helped, every hand we have extended, every time we chose compassion over indifference, we have been repaying what you received from him and what I received from you." Thomas pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Virginia Turner. More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." "I know," she smiled. "I love you too." The years continued to pass. James grew into a thoughtful young man with a natural talent for managing cattle. Rose became a skilled seamstress who worked alongside her mother, bringing fresh ideas to the business. The twins found their own paths, William joining James on the ranch while Robert pursued his studies and eventually became a school teacher. In 1898, on their 15th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Virginia with a special gift. He led her to the barn where a beautifully restored wagon waited, its wood polished and its wheels new. "You recognize it?" he asked. Virginia walked around it slowly, her hand trailing along the wood. Then she gasped. "This is the wagon from that first day, when you drove me home from town." "The same one." Thomas moved to stand beside her. "I kept it all these years, even after I bought newer ones. I could never bring myself to get rid of it because it reminded me of the day my life truly began." He took her hands in his. "Virginia, you have given me 15 years of happiness I never dreamed possible. You have made me a better man, a better father, a better member of this community. I wanted to restore this wagon as a reminder that the best things in life often start with a simple act of kindness." Virginia was crying openly now, but they were tears of joy. "Thomas Turner," she said, "you walked into a general store 15 years ago and changed my entire world. You gave me food when I was hungry, work when I was desperate, and love when I thought I would never have it. You have been my partner, my best friend, my home. I love you more today than I did the day we married. and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." They kissed there in the barn, surrounded by hay and sunlight and memories, and it felt like coming full circle, from desperation to abundance, from strangers to soulmates, from counting pennies to counting blessings. 30 years. It had been 30 years since that September afternoon when Virginia Carter walked into Henderson's general store with 7 cents in her palm and a heart full of despair. Now it was September again, 1813, and Virginia Turner sat on the porch of her beautiful home, watching her grandchildren play in the yard below. Her husband of 3 decades sat beside her, his hair now silver where it had once been sun-bleached brown, his blue eyes still as kind as they had been the day they met. "Tell me again," Virginia said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Tell me about the day you saw me counting pennies. What were you thinking?" Thomas wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "I was thinking that I had never seen someone carry themselves with such dignity in the face of hardship. I was thinking that if I did not do something, I would regret it for the rest of my life. I was thinking that you deserved better than what life had given you. And if I could help make that happen, even in a small way, then I should." He paused, watching little Virginia, their granddaughter, teaching her younger brother how to skip stones. "But mostly," he continued, "I think some part of me recognized that you were going to change my life. Even if I did not understand how yet." "I was so embarrassed," Virginia admitted softly, "counting those pennies over and over, hoping somehow they would multiply. And then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had been too proud to say out loud." "I am glad I was there that day," Thomas said. "I am glad Mr. Henderson did not extend you credit. I am glad for every circumstance that led us to that moment, because it brought us here." To the porch at sunset, Virginia smiled. "To forever," he corrected. Below them, the ranch spread out in golden afternoon light. Cattle dotted the hillsides. The barn that Thomas's father had built and Thomas had expanded stood strong and weathered. The dress shop in town, now run by Rose and her daughters, employed 20 seamstresses and served clients across 3 states. Their children had grown into people they were proud of. James managed the ranch with integrity and skill. Rose had inherited her mother's eye for beauty and her business sense. William and Robert had found their own paths, both happy, both settled, both carrying forward the values their parents had instilled. And now there were grandchildren, little Virginia with her grandmother's gray eyes, the boys who helped their father with chores. More on the way, according to Rose's latest letter. "We built something," Virginia said softly, "something that will last." "We built a life," Thomas agreed. "A family, a legacy, all because I saw a woman counting pennies and decided to help." Virginia reached up and touched his weathered cheek. "You saw me," she said, "truly saw me. That is what saved me, not the food or the job or even the money. It was knowing that someone saw me as a person, as someone worth caring about. You were always worth caring about." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple, the same sky they had watched together for 30 years, the same hills, the same home. But nothing was the same, really. Everything had grown and changed and deepened. Their love was not the breathless romance of young people anymore. It was something richer, something tested by time and hardship and proven true. "Any regrets?" Virginia asked. It had become their tradition, this question on their anniversary. "Not a single one," Thomas replied, as he always did. "Only that I did not meet you sooner." "We met exactly when we were supposed to," Virginia said. "Any earlier, and we might not have been ready for each other." She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his as she had done thousands of times before. "Thank you, Thomas, for seeing me, for helping me, for loving me all these years. Thank you for letting me." Thomas raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Thank you for taking a chance on a terrible liar with a dusty wagon and a lonely heart." Virginia laughed, and the sound was still beautiful after all these years. "Best decision I ever made." They watched their grandchildren play until the stars came out, twinkling in the vast California sky. Then they rose together and walked inside, hand in hand, to the home they had built together from nothing but love and kindness and the stubborn belief that they deserved something better. From 7 cents to forever, from counting pennies to counting blessings, from two lonely people in a dusty general store to a love that would be remembered for generations. This is the truth that Virginia and Thomas learned, the truth they passed to their children and grandchildren, the truth that echoes down through the years to reach you now. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. Sometimes the person you are meant to love is just one moment of courage away. And sometimes, when you think you have lost everything, you are actually standing at the beginning of the greatest adventure of your life. All you have to do is be brave enough to accept help when it is offered, and kind enough to offer it when you can. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.